Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Minister clearly outlined the provisions and the intentions of the Employment Amendment Bill number 4, and I don't feel any need to reiterate that. I just want to make two comments, if I may. One is, as Chair of the Select Committee that held the hearings and reported back to the House, I want to endorse the Minister's comments about the work of the Select Committee and express my appreciation to all members for their contribution. And the second thing I want to do is welcome the Labor Party's support for this legislation. It is good legislation. It will improve tertiary education. It will improve international education. And I commend the bill to the House. Thank you.
Call Kelvin Davis.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Being a recent member to the Education and Science Select Committee, I have to say I'd just like to acknowledge the Chair, Alan Peachy, for the great job he does. I find him to be a very fair and reasoned chairperson who gives us the opportunity to express our views, and I do appreciate that from the chairperson. Yes, Labor does support this. Bill. It will make a lot of good. It will improve things in education. I particularly like the focus on careers. I think that there isn't enough emphasis on careers in New Zealand education, in particular the transition between secondary schools and tertiary, and then also from tertiary into employment itself. And I don't think we can overemphasise the need for career advice and guidance in schools. The student levies, I have to say I was surprised to see that despite inflation running at about 5%, student levies increased over the 2010 year by over 102%, and that's outrageous. So any moves to cap that are very welcome. The export education side of this bill, Mr Speaker, is interesting. It's basically about representing New Zealand as an educational destination overseas, and I think there need to be measures on that, and that's going to benefit New Zealand and New Zealand education. I did say, I think it was in the first reading, that we need to be careful that we don't forget our own students, our own homegrown students, by overemphasising the fact that we want to attract foreign students into New Zealand. And the part around the private training establishments, I think making sure that we protect the integrity of those institutions is also very important, Mr Speaker. There have been instances of qualifications basically being sold and the falsification of results, and that's unacceptable at any level of the education system, be it in primary schools, secondary schools, or in the tertiary sector in private training establishments, and we have to move to protect the integrity of those institutions, as I've said. So just going back to the student levies, I endorse what my colleague Sue Moroney has also said about them. The student levies are used in institutions to provide services for students, and those services are being jeopardised by another piece of legislation that is going through the House. We have to make sure that students do have the support that they need, the emotional, the social, the health, all the support they need to make sure that they are able to get through their study with the support that they need, Mr Speaker. So the funding squeeze in tertiary education has forced institutions to look elsewhere for funding, and that was why the student levies had risen at such an extraordinary rate. For example, there were increases of up to 600% at Canterbury University, and that's just not on. Especially given the rising cost of living, as we know, is putting pressure on budgets, on students' budgets everywhere, with the cost of living, the cost of gas, the cost of food, the cost of everything. The price of tertiary education has risen 18% since National took office, and out-of-control student levies is just one of the causes. So, Mr Speaker, the Labour government is supporting this bill. We look forward to the committee status. Again, I acknowledge the members of the Education and Science Select Committee, of which I have been a member for a very brief time, and much of that time was interrupted by unsuccessfully contesting a by-election. However, it has been a pleasure to work with them all. Kia ora.